Story 1. The Phone Call. It was a stormy Friday evening, and Jessica was home alone. Her parents had gone out for their anniversary dinner, leaving her with a bowl of popcorn and an old horror movie marathon. The wind howled outside, and the rain tapped relentlessly against the windows. Jessica didn't mind the weather. If anything, it added to the spooky atmosphere of the movie she was watching. Little did she know, her night would take a chilling turn. The movie had just reached its climax when the phone rang. Jessica jumped, spilling a few kernels of popcorn on the floor. She reached for the phone and answered it, expecting her parents. "Hello?" she said, her voice steady despite the unease creeping into her chest. There was silence on the other end, except for the faint sound of breathing. "Hello?" she repeated, this time more firmly. Still, nothing. Then, the call disconnected. Jessica shrugged it off as a prank call, turning her attention back to the TV. But 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, she hesitated before answering. "Hello?" she said, her heart racing. The same breathing. Then, a voice, low and raspy, whispered, "I'm watching you." Jessica's blood turned to ice. She dropped the phone and ran to the front door, making sure it was locked. Her eyes darted around the house, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing seemed out of place, but the eerie feeling of being watched lingered. The phone rang again. She didn't answer. For the next hour, the calls kept coming, each one more disturbing than the last. Whoever was on the other end began describing her in terrifying detail. The color of her shirt, the way her hair was pulled into a messy bun, even the way she fidgeted with her necklace. Jessica was petrified. She called her parents, but they didn't answer. The storm had likely knocked out their phone signal. Desperate, she dialed 911. As the operator answered, there was a loud crash from the back of the house. Jessica screamed, dropping the phone. She grabbed a kitchen knife and cautiously moved toward the sound. The back door was swinging open, rain and wind blowing in violently. The police arrived 15 minutes later, but by then, whoever had been calling her was gone. They found muddy footprints leading up to the back door and then out into the woods behind her house. Jessica never found out who it was that had been watching her that rainy night, but the sound of heavy breathing on the phone would haunt her dreams for years to come. Story 2. The Shadow at the Window. Ethan had always been a heavy sleeper, but that night the storm raging outside kept him awake. His parents had gone out of town for the weekend, leaving him in charge of the house. The rain pounded against the windows, and every once in a while, a flash of lightning would illuminate his room, followed by the deafening boom of thunder. It was nearly 2 a.m., and despite his exhaustion, Ethan couldn't fall asleep. He tossed and turned, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling that had settled in his gut. Something didn't feel right, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Just as he was about to drift off, he heard a faint tapping sound. At first, he thought it was the rain, but this sound was different, deliberate. It was coming from the window. His heart pounded in his chest as he turned over to look. There, in the pale glow of the street lamp outside, was a shadowy figure standing at his window. Ethan froze, his breath catching in his throat. The figure stood perfectly still, as though it was waiting for him to move. His curtains were slightly open, and he could see the outline of a face pressed against the glass. Terrified, Ethan rolled out of bed as quietly as he could, crawling on his hands and knees to the door. He grabbed his phone from the nightstand and dialed his neighbor, Mr. Peterson, an elderly man who had promised to look after him while his parents were away. The phone rang once, twice, and then the call connected. "Hello?" Mr. Peterson's groggy voice came through the line. "Mr. Peterson, there's someone outside my window," Ethan whispered, trying to keep his voice steady. "Please come over." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, Mr. Peterson said something that sent chills down Ethan's spine. "I'm looking out my window now, son. There's no one there." Ethan's blood ran cold. He slowly turned his head back toward the window, and to his horror, the figure was still there, staring directly at him. "I swear there's someone here," Ethan insisted, his voice shaking. Mr. Peterson sighed. I'll be right over. Just stay inside." Ethan hung up, clutching his phone like a lifeline. He didn't take his eyes off the figure at the window, afraid that if he blinked, it would somehow get inside. 5 minutes later, he heard a knock at the front door. He raced downstairs, flinging the door open to find Mr. Peterson standing on the porch, his flashlight in hand. "There's no one outside, son," Mr. Peterson said, his brow furrowed in confusion. Ethan looked back at his window. The figure was gone. The two of them searched the yard, but found no trace of anyone having been there. Mr. Peterson assured Ethan it was just his imagination playing tricks on him, but Ethan knew what he had seen. For the rest of the night, he sat in his living room, wide awake, with every light in the house turned on. He never saw the figure again, but he never slept with his window uncovered after that. Story 3. The Stranger in the Hallway. Megan was babysitting her younger brother Noah, while their parents were out at a dinner party. The rain poured down in sheets outside, creating a constant drumbeat on the roof. The house was old, with creaky floors and drafty windows, which only added to the eerie atmosphere of the night. After putting Noah to bed, Megan curled up on the couch with her laptop, scrolling through social media. It was nearly midnight, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. The house was silent, save for the occasional rumble of thunder and the soft patter of rain. Suddenly, she heard a noise from the hallway, a faint creak, as though someone was walking down the hall. Megan froze, listening intently. Noah was fast asleep, and she hadn't heard him get up. The creaking continued, growing louder, closer. Megan's heart raced as she realized it was heading toward the living room. She grabbed the TV remote and muted the sound, straining to hear any other noises. Then she saw it, a shadow moving across the hallway. It was faint, barely visible in the dim light, but it was unmistakable. Someone was in the house. Megan's first instinct was to check on Noah, but she couldn't bring herself to move. Whoever was in the hallway was between her and his room. She held her breath, praying that they wouldn't come into the living room. The shadow stopped just outside the door. Megan's grip on her phone tightened, her thumb hovering over the call button for 911. She didn't dare make a sound. After what felt like an eternity, the shadow moved away, disappearing back down the hall. Megan waited, listening for any other signs of movement, but the house had fallen silent again. Slowly, she crept out of the living room and made her way to Noah's room. When she opened the door, she found him fast asleep, completely unaware of what had just happened. Megan searched the house but found no one. The doors were locked, the windows shut tight. There was no sign of a break-in, no indication that anyone else had been there. To this day, Megan doesn't know who or what was in the house that night. All she knows is that she wasn't alone in the darkened hallway, and the memory of that shadowy figure still sends chills down her spine whenever she's home alone on a rainy night. These 3 stories serve as a chilling reminder that sometimes the things we fear most aren't just figments of our imagination. Whether it's an intruder lurking outside, a shadow at the window, or a stranger in the hallway, the terror of being home alone on a stormy night is all too real for those who have lived through it.